In our advanced way of selecting, this is refining the edge of the selection. This is clicking the select and mask feature in the options bar of any selection tool. So continue on with this. Let's talk about what these panels actually mean. And if you notice, the entire interface of Photoshop has changed because of our select and mask feature. So on the top right, you can see that the view mode is selected. Here we have a lot of different options. We can select onion skin for the checkered board. We can select just the marching ants, which was what we were looking at before. We can select the overlay, which gives us almost a red jewel-like background instead. A black background, a white background, just simply black and white, or on layers. It's really up to you what you actually pick here, but I prefer the overlay because it looks and focuses on the edge, and you can really define what that is. If you wanted to do opacity, you could change it, but here it's set to 50%, so you can kind of see some textures in the background of this painting. You could also change the color here as well if you wanted to. Now, talking about the next slider down is edge detection. Now this is really interesting because this is based on an algorithm, and if we turn this up, and let's just zoom in here to the edge. If we turn this up, you can see that the edge detection is trying really hard to see where that edge is. Here I'm at a 0 pixel radius, and here I'm at about a 10 pixel radius. It's really dependent on what you're trying to select, but here it's almost like a brush mark that we're trying to select, and we want to make sure that it can tell the difference between the background and the brush mark. And here it's really just seeing as you're sliding, but somewhere between 2 and 4 pixels will be pretty good for this specific selection. When you let go, you can see that it's giving you the option, and this is going to use all of your computer's RAM doing these advanced selection features. I'm going to turn on Smart Radius, and then that will include an additional algorithm. And if we can take a look here, you can see that there's some parts, and here I'm just going to turn the opacity down a little bit. There's some parts of the cheek over here that aren't actually getting selected, and this is a problem-solving technique that we'll go through after we go down the line on the right side of the properties panel. So again, I'm going to go from edge detection of 5 and turning Smart Radius on, and then I just want to smooth. Here I'm going to turn this up a little bit so that we can see exactly what we're doing. So I'm going to smooth that down a little bit. And here my computer is lagging a little bit because of all the RAM that this image is using. But here I'm going to smooth the edge. I'm also going to feather the edge slightly. And depending on your available RAM on your computer, this might take a little bit of time to actually come up in the preview. Here I'm going to feather the edge, I'm going to smooth, and then I'm going to go back and add contrast back to the edge that I'm smoothing down. So it's negotiating between smoothing the edge and creating something that can be dropped into a background and not give you a lot of trouble in terms of blending, but also giving you a nice clean edge that isn't pixelated either. So that's where the contrast comes in. Shifting edge, if you're off by 5 pixels or 15%, it'll add to the border. And then if you're over the border and you want to shrink it, you can go to shift edge into the negative, and then that'll shift everything into the thing that you're trying to select. So it's really interesting in this case, these advanced features, because there's so much you can do. Here, we're going to come back to this in a second, but I just wanted to tell you that output selections or output settings are set to selection. So basically, if we look at this output options bar, you can select it, have it output to a layer mask, a new layer with layer mask, and these are things that we haven't learned yet, but we're going to come back to them because this is so important to understand that once we make a selection, there's so much that we can do with it afterwards. Right now, we're just making a selection so that we can copy and paste it into another document. So coming up over here, we can see that there's a couple of different tools on the left-hand side. We have our quick selection tool, which we have been using. We have the refine edge brush tool and the brush tool. So let's talk about the refine edge brush tool for a moment. Here, if I make that brush a little bit bigger, you can see that I'm adding to my selection with the plus. And so if I come down here and if I just paint a little bit on the cheek, it is looking at that edge and it's saying, well, you're saying I should add to this selection here, and it'll add with an algorithm to that selection, and it'll concentrate a little bit more on what's being seen here. You can also go back and forth, so if that went too far, you can do minus and paint a little bit, and it'll look at that edge and respond accordingly. You can also freehand. You don't have to rely on these algorithms either with the lasso tool. So if you really wanted to come in here and get close and really fine-tune what's happening, here I'm just going to do a lasso that will subtract from this selection, and here you can see that it's really helpful to find that edge, and it's also applying the smooth, feather, and contrast to the edge as well. So sometimes certain parts of an image are really hard to copy over, and this is really advanced selections here that we're getting into. And you can see that I can continue around, but for the sake of the demo here, this is enough to get you started. And trust the algorithms. They'll help prevent you from really diving deep in labor and spending a million years on one selection, but sometimes you just have to do it yourself too. And so there's a negotiation between those two facts, is that sometimes there's images that go really, really fast when you're trying to copy something out of them, and there's other images that take forever. And in this one, this is a very difficult negotiation between the object and the background. So we're trying our best here. But after we make that initial pass, we have a really good selection of what we're going to be carrying over. So if I just hit OK for the sake of the demo, remember we're outputting to selection here, and we'll go over a lot more that you can do in this panel, but right now just remember smooth, feather, contrast, and the edge detection of 2 or 3, and the smart radius turned on, and that'll help you a lot with some of these automated features that will speed up your workflow. So I'll just hit OK here, and now we have our selection. If I hit Command C here, that'll copy it to the clipboard, and then if I hit Command V, that'll transfer it over to our new document that we've created. This image is huge. This is the largest option for the Getty Open Images. I'm going to hit Command T, and that will give me my transform option. So I'm just going to make this a lot smaller and negotiate it that way. After we finish this, we have to check in the options bar, we have to commit that transform, or just simply hit the enter key on your keyboard. And so there we have the selection that we've created with our edge. And if this was something that I really wanted to work on in a more advanced way, I would definitely concentrate more on the feathers and make those more believable. But what we have here is a really believable cut from the bust to the neck to the cheeks and the hat. So that's really believable there.